The sun has left and forgotten me.
Your stories don't define you, but how you tell them will. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and chief storymaker at Elkins Consulting. Whether you're sharing business stories or personal stories, how you share them makes a difference in how you experience yourself and how others perceive you. Stories connect us on a physiological level. They can release oxytocin and serotonin in our brains, the feelings of love and belonging. And they can connect us through our heart rates. According to bioengineering researchers in City College, New York, Lucas Pera and Jens Madsen, when we experience story, our heartbeats start to fluctuate in sync. So be intentional about the stories you share. Today's guest is Rashina Gajjar. I met her through our mutual friend, Jennifer Jane Young, who is very insightful and always eager to connect people who she believes need to meet. And when Jennifer and I met, she asked me to walk her through her StrengthsFinder results. And after one concept that I shared with her, she immediately introduced me to Rashina because she knew that we all three of us, have something in common. And you'll hear it in our stories as we move into this podcast episode. So, Rashina, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
Me too. As you know, I always try to start my podcast episodes by introducing my guest in a way that gives our listeners more context for who we are as individuals, because people are far more complicated than one podcast episode or one post on Facebook. And I think sometimes we get stuck into a vision of somebody based on one interaction. So I'm going to ask you to share something about yourself that most people might not know so that our listeners have a multidimensional view of who you are.
Okay, so I was once robbed by a baby elephant.
What?
Yeah.
Okay, we
Now, a
have
lot
to hear the
of people will
story.
know about that, but that was the one. Well, so I was born in the UK, but when I was 6 years old, my family moved to India for the first time, and we're originally from India, but we ended up living in a different part of India for 4 years. And whilst we were living there, my dad was very insistent on taking us out of school and getting us to travel all around the country and to several neighboring countries. And so one of those travels took us to this orphanage, and there was a tour guide who was taking us around, and he took me into the elephant pen and put me on his back because I was very young. I was maybe 7 or 8 years old, and he had actually hidden a packet of biscuits in my back pocket without telling me. And so a little baby elephant came up, and I felt something really weird in my pocket. And it was the trunk of this little baby elephant that had grabbed the packet of biscuits and was, wanting to have a little treat. So yeah, that's
Oh, wow. That's so sweet. Do you remember the elephant's name?
no, I don't,
No.
unfortunately.
6 years old is about the age that we start remembering things, that our memories start to become conscious in our story. So I think that's an awesome early memory for you.
Yeah, and I've often thought about it since that I'm so lucky that being of Indian descent and being born in England, that I actually had an opportunity in my early childhood to experience my kind of original heritage, culturally speaking, but also because it was a time that India will never really get back because now the country has changed a lot. The technological landscape has changed a lot. And it's just really impacted a lot of the major cities in terms of what they look like and what they feel like. And so I just feel so deeply lucky that I was able to have that moment as a young girl in this country that actually I had a massive connection to through through generations before. So yeah, it was really special.
Wow. I have so many different directions in my head that we could go because there's so much in that story about identity and character and a sense of place and being able to appreciate a sense of place without having to own it or to stay there or to have pride that is a superior kind of pride. And I'm sure you know where I'm going with this because there's so many people that wherever they're born has to be the best place, right? Like, especially in the US, you hear about this um, proud to be an American, which, okay, that's okay, but that doesn't mean it's the best place. It just means that that's what where you were born and what is familiar. And I always struggle with people who have that, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of an over the top, an exaggeration of the best this or the best that, when we really can't compare one thing to another. I'll give you an example. When I was in Oregon on the coast and I was watching the sunset that was spectacular over the Pacific Ocean. And there are very few, there's only the west coast of the US where you would see the sunset over the ocean. The East Coast, you'd only see the sunrise, of course. And a guy was walking by, he said, "Isn't that the most beautiful sunset you've ever seen?" And I thought, it's beautiful. I don't know that it's the most beautiful. It just seemed like hyperbole to me. So when you think about spending that time, it was 4 years. You were born in the UK, moved to India for 4 years. So you would have been there from like 5 years old to 9 years old.
6 to 10 years old. Yeah.
6 to 10. And then and you traveled around a lot in India in those 4 years. Where did you go after that?
I went to France, to the south of France with my family for four
So
years
you
again.
okay. So you lived in four different countries in the first 12 years of your life.
Hmm.
Wow, that's cool. That's
It was
really
a
cool.
lot. It was really interesting, just from the perspective of being, I guess these are the years where you're really forming some semblance of an identity on a subconscious level. And so from that perspective, it was a really formative experience and it changed me in ways that I will never know and in some ways that I also know.
I mean, we could go all kinds of different directions from this, but what I'd like to focus on is to come back to your sense of identity and how that moving around has shown up in positive and negative ways. So when we met, it was because you were feeling anxious about moving on. You had been in one place for a little while and you were getting that urgency, that sense of, oh, I need to switch things up again. And we talked about that as your strength of adaptability and activator, which means that I have those two as well. And I think that's part of why we connected so deeply. And we talked about how sometimes we end up sabotaging ourselves because we change for the sake of change, not for a specific reason or strategic change. So after our conversation, what do you think changed for you?
So this was really interesting because I have done many different modalities over the years, and I am personally, I'm a limiting belief coach as well. So I've worked a lot on my limiting beliefs. And when I met you, it was a moment where I knew that it wasn't really a limiting belief getting in the way, and I knew that it wasn't a lot of the other different things that I've tried. But I had this feeling that I was missing some core information and I didn't know what it was. And there was this moment where I couldn't sleep because I really felt this strong pull to leave the city that I was living in Spain. And at the same time, I felt that I wasn't ready to leave and that I didn't want to leave. And I thought, okay, this is where I need to open myself up to some other solution and some other answer that could come. And I spoke to Jen, the person that we know in common, who is just a really wonderful person and so deeply insightful on so many different topics. And she said, have you done your Clifton Strength Finder test? It may be that you have high adaptability. And I thought, okay, what is this? This sounds a little bit crazy, but I was so desperate. And I thought, I need to find out what this is. And I'm the kind of person who likes to actively work on the things that are challenging me. So I thought, okay, there is no harm in trying. Let's see what happens. And what resulted was a really profoundly life-changing conversation with you that opened me up to a lot of different aspects of myself that I had kind of been on some level aware of, but didn't really know what to do with. And just to explain for people who might not be aware of Clifton Strengths Finder and what we're actually talking about. So essentially, this is a test that you can do that Sarah specializes in. And essentially, you find out what your top strengths are. And one of mine was adaptability. And this anecdote, this concept that Jen had shared, which we mentioned earlier, was the concept of if you have high adaptability, you're liable to sometimes change things up in your life very quickly in areas where it may not be necessary in order to feed your adaptability because it's not getting fed elsewhere. So what had been happening, interestingly enough, is I had started going to flamenco dancing classes. And because of this, I suddenly didn't want to move from the city. And I had decided I was going to move. I decided I was going to go traveling. And all of a sudden, these flamenco classes had me in spirals of doubt. So then when I spoke to Sarah, and she told me some very interesting things about this specific trait and also a couple of other ones that are in my chart, I realized that it may not be necessary for me to move my entire life and essentially go to somewhere else and spend my life traveling in very different ways, and that it was possible for me to stay in one location at the very least for a little bit longer. And that one of the reasons that the flamenco had actually appeased me and sent me into the spiral of doubt was because it was feeding my adaptability. So I no longer had that feeling of needing to nourish my adaptability in some way by throwing things out of the window in my life, i.e., where I was living. So it was a really, really interesting experience from that perspective because my whole life I've felt such a strong need for variety. And I always felt somehow that this was wrong. And I think that this conversation really helped that to click into the right place. And so that was a really major outcome. It's just understanding myself better. It's really become a life strategy now that whenever I feel that I am getting restless and I'm about to just chuck everything out, then I have to look at myself and say, okay, how can I feed my adaptability better? How can I give myself more variety and create experiences that really nourish that part of myself? So that was a really major takeaway for me, and it stopped me from making a decision that I may have regretted and ultimately really paved the path for a deeper self-understanding.
I love that. There's so many pieces here. I mean, my first thought when you said that you are familiar with all these other tools for self-reflection and personal growth, and you were ready to try another tool. And I think a lot of people get sucked into thinking that one tool is going to solve all of the problems. And we know that's not the case because you're not going to have your general practitioner doctor give you an eye exam, right? You're not going to go to your ophthalmologist for mental health issues, right? Each part of us sometimes requires a different type of expertise. And I love that you've explored so many different kinds because that's what makes you a good coach for other people.
I think life is really about exploring. And when you go to different practitioners and teachers, you really learn to see the world in a new way from a different lens. So you're opening up all these different lenses of understanding and at the same time healing yourself. So I think it's really win-win from that perspective. And I do think that it helps me with my clients because I can then see them from that perspective as well as the other ones that I've been learning about. And as I said earlier, limiting beliefs, while they are incredibly powerful when you change them, and it can be transformational, in this situation, it's not what I needed. I needed to understand a different aspect of myself, more behavioral and identity-based one. So
Mm.
it was truly such a treasured moment for me.
I think about limiting beliefs in terms of more related to the stories of our past that we hold on to that are self-critical. And we do need to uncover those for sure, especially if they came from people that we admired and respected, and they said, and it could be totally unintentional. I think about, in particular, a client whose mother said something kind of cruel to her when she was like 10 years old. And she held on to that for 50, 60 years, right? The one time, and maybe she said it twice, but there's all kinds of other times where she told her how wonderful she was and how smart she was and how proud she was. But it's those two situations, two incidents that this woman was holding on to for so long. So that is what feeds our limiting beliefs. And you're the expert in that. And I think about strengths more as your approach to things. How are you approaching these limiting beliefs? So if you know that you have a tendency to blow things up because you need to feed that sense of adventure, the desire to change, to have things be uncertain because you love it, and you can actually use that tool to help address those limiting beliefs.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that there are some distinctions to be made in terms of if you have the limiting belief, for example, cannot have a stable home environment, or I must uproot myself, or I'm not safe. These might contribute towards you throwing things out of the window, but from not from a place of safety. I
Right.
think that in terms of if you have your main strength as adaptability, you could still have positive beliefs around your home and where you're living and your safety and your environment. And at the same time, feel compelled to move things around, but not from a place of trauma and not from a place of limitation. I
Right.
think it's really a case of each individual looking at their lives and looking at themselves and understanding better how the things that are their major strengths and that nourish them and that kind of help them be successful at the same time have a flip side and how to balance that flip side. Like that's kind of how I see what you do, actually.
I love that. So when you think about a client that you've worked with in the past, I'd love to hear a story about a client's success when they came back to you and said, this changed my life.
Mhm. Okay, so I actually have one that specifically relates to location, interestingly enough. So I was working with a client who was absolutely dead set on living in New York. And she was really pushing and pushing and pushing in order to do it, but it wasn't quite working out. And she felt that she just needed to keep pushing and that then somehow this house would materialize that she was looking for. And in the end, we ended up doing a belief session, and the belief session was about letting go. So she had the belief, I cannot let go, where I must be in control is another variant of that belief. We did the belief session. And then I checked in with her a few weeks later, and she had decided not to move to New York and to move to Oakland in California. So it was very interesting just to see the value of a belief when it comes to how you manage the situations in your life and the friction that is generated also by limiting beliefs. So in this case, she was experiencing friction because she had the belief she couldn't let go. And so she wasn't really in flow. She was pushing for something that wasn't really at that moment in time meant for her. So that was just kind of an interesting example of a very life-changing event that happened as a result of looking at your limiting beliefs, specifically to do with our home environments.
So does she love Oakland? I mean, what was
She's super
the end
happy.
result?
She's super incredibly happy, and her daughter is going to school there, and it's just been a really beautiful experience for them. I think that they're so much happier there than having been in New York. But yeah, this is it's just something that really popped into my mind.
I love that. I think about that a lot, allowing things to happen, still advocating for yourself and making choices, and at the same time allowing things to change what you thought you wanted. So have
Mhm.
you done that in recent years where you kind of have you had this idea of what you wanted and then you took inventory and realized maybe that's not what I actually want. Maybe it's what I wanted 10 years ago, but I'm not so sure I want that now.
I think a really big moment for me was having my marketing agency and making the transition to doing Believe coaching because for a long time it was my dream to have this agency and to do storytelling, and I was doing such beautiful work with people. And I guess learning to let go and surrender that and move into this path that I think is more aligned with my broader purpose, that really required me to yield and to let go of something that I thought that I had really wanted and that at the time I did want, but that was no longer in the forefront of my vision. And it was tricky. It's definitely a process of surrender, but I think it's really important to just allow it to be a process. So rather than having to make the decision overnight, giving yourself plenty of time to unravel what it is that is happening, whether you still want to release, whether you still want the thing badly enough. Listen to yourself, watch yourself, observe how you're interacting with the specific situation. We've been taught so much to push, 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 push in this world that we kind of forget to give things time.
So when was a time where you were doing that and you were able to let go?
So I was actually forced to let go because I broke my ankle in August of last year. And so I think this was really a universal gift in many ways. It just really forced me to slow down and to think very deeply about where I was placing my time and energy. And it facilitated this transition process because it just helped me to stop pushing and to focus on where I really wanted to go. And I think now all of our brains have been changed very deeply by all the different information that's available to us and all the different tasks that we have to do. And so we want to kind of have it all and manage it all. And I was really struggling with the idea of, okay, well, I actually really love the storytelling, but I really feel this deeper purpose and passion that I need to explore and that I've been preparing for all this time. And I think this event came in to facilitate that transition.
So when was a moment where you realized you were on the right path? Was it with a client? Was it after you met with a client? Was it your own aha moment? Because sometimes I'll have deep, deep self-learning because of an experience with a client.
Mhm. Um, to be honest, it happens in a lot of micro moments. So sometimes I'll have a call with a client and something emerges on that call that is so transformational for them that it shapes how they're living their reality and how they're responding to things in their lives. And that for me is a big confirmation because it feels like, okay, I'm doing the right thing and what I'm doing is valuable for others. And it just really helps when you see it in real time. I also think just when I started this transition, there were a couple of different projects that I was working on that I was bringing my storytelling hat to. And so I wanted to make things very beautiful and very branded, and I wanted to really bring my essence into it. And I think it was an occupational hazard. And one of the specific examples was my website. So I was really frustrated for many years because I've had my belief coaching certification since 2021. So already it's been many years that I've been preparing to make this transition. But I kept getting stuck on my website. And when the ankle got broken and I was really bedridden for many weeks after surgery, I started just intentionally putting a lot of love and effort and energy into it. And the steps kind of revealed themselves as I started to advance. So this is something as well that it's a little leap of faith each time. You're never going to get complete answers. You have to be somewhat in the fogginess of creation. And so it happened to me that I was in that fog for a long time with my storytelling hat, being like, yeah, but I really want it to be beautiful and sublime. And in the end, we ended up creating something that I was really deeply happy with. And that in itself was an aha moment for me because I realized that it is possible to bring together these different parts of myself and to bring my very special way of seeing things into the work that I'm doing with clients, into the brand that I'm building, and the way that I want to navigate the world. I didn't want to create something generic. I didn't want to create something that didn't bring flavor and color into people's lives. But it took a long time to get to that. And there were many times that I thought that I wouldn't be able to find what I was looking for. And it was a series of those little guided steps. Another example is the social media coach that I was working with, Courtney Johnson. She is amazing. I went from literally listening to her podcast and lurking to actually working with her one-on-one. And it's just there have been so many moments like that on my entrepreneurial journey, on my coaching journey with clients, where little things happen that really infuse you with a sense of hope and possibility for the future. I could probably give 100 examples, but I think in the end, it's all the same that when you have that intention and you set forth, you're met with the support of the universe. It just sometimes takes a different shape than what you expected.
But those individual micro moments are important to recognize. I think sometimes we say, oh, it happens like that all the time. But if we're not picking out that moment, we're not appreciating the how meaningful those moments are. Because I've asked people, tell me about a time that you had a really satisfying moment with a client. They're like, oh, I have them every day. Okay, tell me about one of them. But they can't. And I think that does us a disservice and it does our clients a disservice because that means that they aren't providing unique reward for you as a coach, right? So when you were talking about the website, my immediate thought was, oh, she was stuck because you wanted it to be something particular and you were overthinking it. And then just like your client, you were able to release that and allow it to be what it was going to be. But as you're pushing at it and trying to make something happen that wasn't ready to happen for you, as soon as you were able to say, "Oh, I need to release this and it will come to me," just like you did with your client. I just think that's beautiful.
I really do think that everything has its own timing, and the moments of preparation are important. The moments that you're stumbling are important because they also get you there. But don't be frustrated if it doesn't happen in those moments because it will happen in the right way. I think that that's something I've been constantly learning in my life. And this was an example of it. And I think also for my client, it was an example for her as well of the divine timing of things. And yeah, I've really started to believe in that. I mean, I've always believed in it, but especially in this journey of working for yourself and being an entrepreneur and working with people, you see it so regularly that it becomes undeniable.
Mm. I wish you could say that again. Do you remember what you just said? Well, we'll have the Fathom note taker, and hopefully it will capture those moments that you have with your clients that make your journey undeniable. The confirmation is undeniable that you're on the right path. And I don't believe there's a wrong path. And I think that was part of a conversation I had with Jennifer about how do I know I'm on the right path? And she had posted something about that. And we were in complete agreement that there is no wrong path.
Mhm.
It's just a matter of recognizing what learning opportunities are on it and where it's guiding you.
Yeah, I think that we really have so much power to sculpt our lives, and working with limiting beliefs has definitely helped me understand that, but also traveling extensively has helped me to understand that because you see so many different people all around the world, how they're living, how they are choosing to move through the world. And it's so fascinating because you really understand that there's such a level of malleability. And even in the act of observing and interacting with different communities and different cultures, you also see the malleability of yourself, how you can elicit different responses from different people, how you can shape the interactions that you're having. And I find it truly fascinating because it's just really another example of how guided we are and how much we can kind of create outside of what we've traditionally been taught is like there is one path and that's the path that you need to go on that's right. It's like no, there's actually so many different paths outside of that that you can take that impact other events and other people and interactions.
Mhm. When you think of your travels, I'm going to wrap this back to the beginning with that little elephant that pickpocketed you to get its treats. I could totally see that because when I'm hiking and I run into dogs that aren't mine, I always have treats in my pocket and they always come over and stick their nose in my pocket. They can smell it from a mile away. When
Mhm.
you think about your travels now, what is one additional or more recent vivid memory that you have that you feel like changed you in some way that you didn't know at the time, but later on you realized, oh, that was a pivotal moment.
I think it was so this is a story that I really love, but on so many different levels. It's a big story though, but I think we have
That's
little
okay.
time for it. So I was a couple of years ago in this little Italian island, which is literally my favorite island, and I won't stop talking about it. I literally refuse to stop talking about it. Its name is Ischia. It's just off of Naples. And I went there for my birthday week by myself. And I bumped into this girl who was a Taiwanese tattoo artist, like a traveling tattoo artist, who had won some kind of a lottery ticket to get a visa to Europe. So she was just already, this is already getting quite interesting. So we met in the bus on the way to this castle. And on the way back from the castle, she needed to go back to Naples, but there weren't any taxis and there weren't any buses, and she was running late. So we hitchhiked with this car full of people. It was three guys in the car. And the only reason that I got in the car is because the person in the driving seat of the car reminded me of my first love. So I thought, okay, I got kind of a good vibration. So I thought, okay, this is fine. So then we got into the car and we started making friends with them. And in the end, I prolonged my trip and I stayed at the cousin's B&B of the driver of the car. So we actually, it was, so it was kind of like this community event in the end. Um, and then a couple of years later, so actually last year when I turned 30, I went back to this island. But through a very strange turn of events, I had reconnected with my first love, and now he's my boyfriend again. And so I actually went with
Oh,
him. So I went with him to the island, and we ended up staying at the same B&B of the cousin of this guy. And we went out with him and just had like a really beautiful time. And it was such a kind of, there was such a circularity to this that I thought was so interesting. And it really marked me on some level because I think that when you go traveling somewhere, you think, okay, I'm going to see a place, but you forget that you can interact with the people in these spaces, that they can become part of your life, that your community can become the world and the people in it, and that you can maintain those relationships for a lifetime. And I think this particular set of circumstances was a really beautiful reminder of that. And it just felt so wonderful, especially in that specific moment of my life where all these miracles were happening, to go back to this place and have kind of a little family there. So that was something that really shaped me.
hmm. That is such a great story. I love it. And I'm guessing that our listeners are generating their own stories. They're remembering and uncovering their own experiences with travel. And it doesn't have to be distant travel, although I love distant travel. But I know a lot of people who struggle. They don't want to get on an airplane or, they have other limitations that are just either self-imposed or not. But there are so many ways to engage in that way as if you're traveling and seeing something for the first time. And that's what came to mind when you were telling your story, is that you don't have to go that far to have those small world moments.
I think one thing that travel is so interesting for us, it forces us to be adopting the lens of a learner and an explorer. And this is something that you can do anywhere, and you can even do it in your own city. And I think the people that I know that are the most happy in their lives are the people who do this in their own environments. So being a tourist of your own town, I think it's something that is very easy to overlook, but is infinitely rewarding.
Mm, that's perfect. So, Rashina, if you had an opportunity to talk to 1,000 people right now, what is one message that you would want them to remember from you?
Hmm. Okay. What I would like to say is it doesn't matter where you're from, where you grew up, what you were taught to believe about yourself and how the world works for you. You can literally sculpt your entire life in any way that you can imagine and that you desire, and that you hold that power within yourself. It sits deep within you, and you can just start to learn how to use that, and you'll start to see all around you how your life will change. And I just want you to carry that belief and that possibility away with you from this conversation.
Lovely. That's perfect. Thank you so much for joining me today on Your Stories Don't Define You, because you really live that. It's not the things that happen to us or around us in our lives that make us who we are, but the way that we talk about those things, the way we share them with others, and the lessons that we learn from them. So thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure. I'm so grateful to be here. Thank you.
Listeners, now it's your turn. What will you do to choose tomorrow? What is one thing that you can do to decide that you have earned and that you deserve the life that you want? Every day you have choices to make to remind yourself that you deserve the life that you want. That means choosing the labels that fit you rather than holding on to the ones that people gave you. It means choosing your behavior and knowing that every word you say, every click you make, every like, every comment, every share demonstrates who you are, not just to others, but also to you. I would love to hear your thoughts about this episode. Message me and visit elkinsconsulting.com. Go to the podcast page and check out all the links so that you can get in touch with Rashina and so that you can leave us a message and let us know what your thoughts are about this episode. Thank you so much for listening to Your Stories Don't Define You. How you tell them will.
That's the time you must keep on trying. Smile, what's the use of crying? You'll find that life is still worthwhile if you just smile.